Meghan Markle's new podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder, launched with some serious ambition. The title alone suggests something intimate, raw, and maybe even game-changing. A show where female entrepreneurs open up about what it really takes to build something from nothing, empowerment, vulnerability, real talk. The show promised something meaningful. Open conversations with women founders, candid stories about the real struggles and triumphs of building something from the ground up, and a space to explore what leadership looks like through a female lens. It had the potential to tap into the larger cultural conversations around women in business, representation, and the challenges of breaking new ground. That's what the promo material seemed to promise. But just a few episodes in, it's becoming clear that the execution hasn't quite lived up to the idea, not yet at least. On paper, everything seemed to be lining up. A powerful concept, a well-known host, an audience that was already paying attention. But the reality of the show's early episodes tells a different story. So far, Confessions of a Female Founder has struggled, not just to connect, but to feel like it has a clear identity, and the reactions have been mixed at best. Behind closed doors, there are reports that Meghan and her team have been reaching out to A-list celebrities in hopes of locking in the kind of guests who would turn heads. Big star names like Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and even Oprah. But the response, it's been quiet, very quiet. Sources close to the production say most of these calls haven't even been returned. One insider offered a pretty blunt take saying, "No one's picking up the phone for that diva." It's a cutting remark, and yes, we'll say allegedly, but the sentiment reflects the kind of friction that may be brewing in the background. For the first episode, the guest was Whitney Wolfe Herd, the founder of Bumble and a notable figure in the world of tech and entrepreneurship. She's smart, accomplished, and brings plenty of relevant experience to a conversation about leadership and innovation. Still, her appearance didn't have the pop culture pull we're expecting. The anticipation around Meghan's first guest was high, and while Whitney is certainly a strong choice, she didn't bring the wow factor some hoped would set the show apart right out of the gate. Then there's the tone of the podcast itself, which has drawn quite a bit of criticism. Several major outlets reviewed the early episodes and came away unimpressed. Some called the conversation superficial. Others said the episodes felt more like extending monologues rather than meaningful discussions. A recurring complaint that Meghan spends too much time talking about herself and not enough time really listening to or engaging with her guests. And yes, Meghan did share some very personal stories, like a scary post-birth medical emergency involving preeclampsia. And while these kinds of topics are important and do deserve airtime, the way they were presented came off a bit, forced. Critics felt the storytelling lacked the kind of vulnerability and authenticity that really draws people in. It felt polished, packaged, and maybe even a little too curated. What's also becoming pretty clear is that Meghan's royal fame alone isn't enough to keep the show afloat. People expected her to deliver a podcast filled with heavy-hitting guests, meaningful stories and conversations that actually resonate. Instead, it's starting to look like a passion project that hasn't quite figured out its identity. And Hollywood, known for being both fickle and fast-moving, isn't being patient about it. Instead of feeling raw and open, many parts of the show come across as calculated, almost like the goal is to manage Meghan's public image rather than to explore meaningful stories. And when you mix that with high expectations and an audience that's already wary, the result is disappointment. Another factor worth mentioning is the context. Meghan is trying to build a new media identity in a space that moves fast and rewards fresh, engaging content. And she's doing it while still carrying the weight of her past roles, both as a working royal and as a public figure who's constantly in the spotlight. People either root for her or watch her with scepticism. There's not much in between, and that makes the margin for error incredibly small. Some fans argue this is all part of the process, that Meghan is doing what many public figures have tried before, pivoting from one chapter of life into another, a more creative, fulfilling one. But others see a pattern forming. They point to other projects that haven't quite landed, from media deals that didn't take off, or to TV appearances that felt awkward or forced. To them, this podcast is just one more example of potential not being fully realised. And maybe that's what stings the most, because this idea, the core of it, is actually important. The stories of women building companies, innovating in male-dominated industries, taking personal risks, those stories matter. And there's absolutely a place for them in podcasting. But in order for it to work, the spotlight has to stay on those stories. The guest has to be the star. The host's job is to guide, to ask thoughtful questions, to create a space for something meaningful to emerge, not to dominate the conversation. Right now though, it feels like the show hasn't quite figured that out. The structure is there, the topics are important, but the delivery needs work. The tone has to shift. The conversation have to become more dynamic, more spontaneous and more balanced. And the guest list, it's going to have to step up too. Whether that means bringing in business leaders with strong personal stories or public figures who rarely give in-depth interviews, the show needs voices that make people want to stop what they're doing and listen. Because the truth is, Hollywood doesn't wait. If a project doesn't deliver quickly, people move on. There are too many other options, too many other shows, voices and platforms competing for attention. There's still time for Confessions of a Female Founder to turn things around, but the next few episodes will be critical. This isn't just about saving a podcast, it's about proving that Meghan can build something on her own terms, something that's not about royalty, not about drama, but about stories that actually resonate. Whether or not that happens, we'll see. But one thing is clear, if the show wants to stick around, it's going to need more than ambition. It's going to need substance. Thanks for listening.